Some wars don't begin with gunfire, but with a single quiet moment, the moment when the most powerful figure disappears from the spotlight. When Iran's supreme leader stops appearing in public, when the bunker becomes the final place of refuge, the question is no longer whether a crisis will happen, but how it will explode. In today's video, we're going to peel back the layers of a tightening chessboard in the Middle East, from the fear within the Iranian regime to the silent positioning of a military machine. And if you're someone who values deep, deliberate geopolitical analysis, not just headline chasing, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the most critical perspectives of this moment. Some historic moments don't come with fanfare, smoke, or air raid sirens piercing the night. They arrive quietly, almost invisibly, and yet they make the whole world hold its breath. It's the moment when absolute power reveals, for the first time, the one thing it always tries to conceal: fear. As long as a leader continues to appear in public, even amid a nation in turmoil, the system can still convince itself that things are under control. But when that leader suddenly vanishes from view, when the most symbolically important rituals are canceled without explanation, the message being sent is no longer meant for the people. It's for the world. Something serious is unfolding behind closed doors. In Iran, that absence isn't just a ceremonial detail. It comes at the very moment when the streets are stained with the blood of protesters, when provinces ignite like sparks no one can put out, when the flow of information is choked and the image of a unified nation begins to fracture. Above ground, there are angry chants, live bullets, and crowds that no longer fear. But deep underground, power retreats into silence. A man who has held the fate of a nation in his hands for decades no longer stands atop a podium looking down on the masses. He hides behind concrete, steel, and isolation walls. That moment shifts the biggest question from how unstable is Iran to, does this power structure still believe in itself? Because history has proven again and again, regimes don't collapse when outside enemies grow stronger, but when belief within begins to break. And what's most dangerous is the cold precision of the timing. Just as the supreme authority disappears from the public eye, strange movements begin to thicken across the military map of the Middle East. Aircraft carriers are no longer stationed in symbolic spots. Fighter squadrons are no longer just drilling. Refueling planes start appearing with a frequency fit for a long-term scenario, not political theater. The world is entering a gray zone where no war has been declared, but every sign of war preparation is in place. And in that gray zone, the mindset of the person in power becomes the most dangerous variable. Because when a leader starts acting as if tomorrow could be the last day, every decision becomes one of survival, not stability. It's in that moment that the story shifts, from protests in the streets to something deeper, darker. What is happening inside the sanctuary of power? And why has a supreme leader chosen to vanish from the light, just when his country needs his presence more than ever? In regimes built on the cult of personality, a leader's presence is never just symbolic. It's the psychological pillar that holds the entire system upright. As long as he appears, even with a weary face or a trembling voice, the message remains clear. Power is still intact. Order has not yet collapsed. That's why the moment Iran's supreme leader stops showing up in public means far more than a simple security decision. It's like a void opening up at the very center of the system, a silence that hits harder than any speech. When the most symbolic rituals are canceled, when familiar images vanish from state media, a quiet wave of doubt ripples through the lower tiers of power. Mid-level officials begin to wonder whether the orders they're receiving are still coming from someone truly in control. Security commanders start weighing their own personal risks before carrying out harsh directives. And in society, where fear once served as the tightest binding chain, a dangerous question begins to surface. If even the man at the top is in hiding, why should the rest remain silent? That disappearance carries another, more subtle and troubling layer of meaning. It signals that the real fear is no longer the crowd in the streets. It's something within the system itself. The history of the Middle East is full of leaders who responded to unrest by showing up more, speaking louder, and flexing their authority more forcefully. Retreating from the spotlight, then, is the move of someone no longer certain, that the guns surrounding him will always point in the same direction. When trust in absolute loyalty begins to falter, public visibility is no longer a shield. It becomes a liability. In this context, the bunker isn't just a shelter from bombs. It's a symbol of strategic withdrawal, but also a quiet admission that power is shrinking its own space to exist. The deeper it burrows underground, the farther it drifts from the outside reality. Decisions are no longer made in rhythm with the pulse of society, but filtered through layers of intermediaries, based on assessments designed more to protect the leader than reflect the truth. And that is the most dangerous moment for any authoritarian regime, not when enemies attack, but when the person at the top begins living in isolation, in a world where fear is amplified and trust erodes by the hour. Prolonged silence is no longer a tactic, it becomes the new normal. Power no longer radiates from the public square or the sacred halls. It retreats into narrow corridors, where every decision carries the weight of survival instinct. From the moment the leader disappears from the light, the story no longer revolves around outward appearances. It shifts inward, into sealed rooms, hushed conversations, and the mindset of a man calculating not for the future of a nation, but for his own personal safety. And to understand why the next decisions could be extreme, unstable, and dangerously unpredictable, we have to go deeper still. Into the bunker, where fear and survival instinct have begun to steer the wheel of power. Inside the bunker, power no longer carries its familiar air of grandeur. It becomes quiet, closed off, and heavy with the scent of survival. Down there, every sound is swallowed by thick concrete, every signal is filtered, and every decision is weighed against a single pressing question. How do we survive one more day? When a leader is forced to retreat deep from the outside world, the first thing to disappear isn't power itself, it's the feeling of control. In its place comes a constant state of vigilance, a creeping distrust even toward the most familiar faces. The intelligence reports and situation briefings that make their way into the bunker are no longer accurate reflections of reality. They're products of careful curation. No one wants to be the bearer of bad news. No one wants to be blamed. And in that process, reality is quietly distorted. Protests are under control, security units are still loyals, provinces are stabilizing, all painting a picture safe enough to preserve hope, but too blurry to make sound decisions. The survival instinct of power begins to show in the smallest of details. Communication networks are pared down to the bare minimum. Orders are no longer transmitted directly through electronic systems. They're carried through people. Succession lists are reviewed, not for a smooth transition, but to guard against betrayal. Worst-case scenarios are laid on the table, not to be prevented, but to prepare for retreat if needed. In that space, time no longer moves to the rhythm of a nation. It ticks to the heartbeat of one man, aging inside his fear. This is the moment when power stops thinking about maintaining order and starts thinking about staying alive. When survival becomes the top priority, all long-term plans and ideals fall by the wayside. Decisions come faster, but from a narrower lens. They grow harsher, but less adaptable. And with that shift, the risk of grave miscalculation multiplies. A leader psychologically backed into a corner starts to see every outside movement as a direct threat, and starts to believe that a show of force is all it takes to make the world back down. But the world outside the bunker is not standing still. While inside is contraction, outside is escalation. With every passing hour, the gap between bunker perception and geopolitical reality grows wider, and that gap creates a dangerous paradox. The more threatened power feels, the more willing it becomes to take extreme risks, even military ones, as a way to claw back the initiative it has lost. From that mindset, the focus of power shifts. No longer fixed on the rebellious streets, it begins to look outward, beyond borders. Because when internal control seems lost, the only option left to shift the balance is to apply enough pressure from the outside. And while the bunker remains cloaked in silence, somewhere else, in a space far larger, far louder, the machinery of war begins to move. Combat maps are laid out, strategic locations are marked, forces once on standby begin quietly shifting into position. From a fear that curled inward beneath the earth, the story slips into a new phase, one where military force is no longer hypothetical, but is slowly taking shape on the ground. At this stage, war hasn't erupted, but it has already begun, in another form. It begins with movement. Slow, precise, calculated movement that requires no public explanation. Across the waters of the Middle East, massive steel behemoths no longer sit still in symbolic displays of deterrence. They shift course, reconfigure formations, and enter coordinates that only appear when war plans have been activated at the highest levels of command. When an aircraft carrier moves from a posture of presence to one of combat readiness, it's no longer a political message. It's a purely military signal. In the skies, the airspace grows crowded, but in a very particular way. Not with flashy, low-flying fighter jets, but with a dense presence of logistical platforms, refueling aircraft, early warning planes, electronic surveillance craft. These are the types of movements the public rarely notices, but military planners understand deeply. No sustained air campaign can proceed without them, and there's no reason to deploy them unless the objective goes far beyond mere intimidation. A modern military machine doesn't need to fire a shot to exert pressure. It only needs to operate in sync. When each gear begins to lock into place, the Navy moves into position, the Air Force saturates the skies, command and control systems go live, the adversary feels the weight long before the first explosion. For a leader hiding underground, every report of a newly deployed unit, every satellite image of a reinforced forward base becomes a cold reminder. Time is not on his side. The true threat doesn't lie in the number of weapons, but in their coordination. When multiple forces simultaneously shift into high readiness, it means this scenario wasn't improvised, it was pre-planned. These operations aren't drawn up to apply psychological pressure alone. They're structured to be launched the moment the political green light is given. And in modern warfare, the gap between ready and launched can be as small as one closed-door meeting. At the same time, the electronic battlespace grows more active. Signal intelligence ramps up. Tests of jamming capabilities, probing of air defenses, and radar reaction scans take place quietly. This is the phase where the adversary isn't attacked, they're being read. Every minor reaction is logged, analyzed, and fed into battle models. This is how 21st century warfare prepares itself, not with loud declarations, but with the patient dismantling of the opponent's defensive layers. Within this picture, Iran is no longer facing a single isolated threat. The pressure is coming from multiple directions, multiple layers, and multiple domains all at once. And that produces a particularly dangerous psychological effect, the sense of being completely encircled. Once that feeling sets in, every option begins to look bad, just in varying degrees of severity. Concession may be seen as weakness. Confrontation could mean annihilation. Delay only prolongs the chokehold. It's in that moment that the military machine completes its most important function, not to strike, but to force the adversary into a decision under the worst possible conditions. And when pressure doesn't come from just one nation, but from several simultaneously, the question is no longer who will attack, but who will be drawn in if an attack occurs. Because behind these seemingly independent formations, another structure is quietly taking shape. There are no signing ceremonies, no grand joint statements, but there is coordination, quiet, seamless, and increasingly synchronized. When multiple forces operate in the same tight space, following the same strategic tempo, any war that erupts will no longer be a bilateral affair. At that point, the military machine doesn't just signal the threat of conflict, it unveils something far more dangerous: the emergence of silent alliances, where a single misfired retaliation could trigger a chain reaction that spirals beyond the control of any one side. What makes this crisis uniquely dangerous isn't the power of any single nation, but how that power is slowly linking together in silence. There is no official alliance, no shared flag, no public pledge of collective defense broadcast to the media. Yet on the ground, the pieces are snapping into place, coldly, precisely. Forces that appear independent are operating in the same time frame, the same strategic space, following the same logic of warfare. In modern conflict, alliances no longer require signatures on paper. All it takes is shared intelligence, coordinated logistics, and synchronized defense to generate massive pressure. When forward bases open their gates to multiple forces at once, when airspace is jointly managed, when reconnaissance data is shared in near real time, the line between supporting and participating becomes dangerously thin. A nation might not fire a single shot and still be part of the war. It's this ambiguity that creates the greatest risk. For Iran, identifying a clear, direct adversary becomes nearly impossible. A retaliatory strike on one target could trigger a response from another. An action intended as self-defense might be interpreted as provocation. And in a theater where forces are already in place, the time to contain escalation is virtually non-existent. Events unfold faster than diplomacy can respond. History has warned us many times. Major wars rarely begin with a single decision. They are the sum of a chain of small actions, each step seeming rational in the moment, but together leading to a point of no return. In the current landscape, even a minor incident, a missile gone astray, a misinterpreted airstrike, an overzealous air defense response, could set off a cascade of reactions that no side truly wants, yet none is able to stop. More frightening still is when the mindset of "we're already committed" begins to shape decisions. Once troops are deployed and national credibility is on the line, withdrawal becomes politically costly. No one wants to be the first to back down, and that hesitation raises the risk of escalation with each passing hour. In this case, war doesn't need aggression, only rigidity. Yet while the outside world fears the spread of open conflict, inside Iran lies another threat. Quieter, but just as destructive, because no matter how intense the external military pressure, it remains a catalyst, not the foundation. The true determinant of a regime's survival lies within, in the strength of its internal cohesion. Ironically, the silent alliances forming outside are exposing Iran's greatest vulnerability at this moment. Under multidirectional pressure, a system must be absolutely unified to endure, but this is precisely when that unity is cracking. Power factions begin making diverging calculations. Those once absolutely loyal begin weighing personal costs. Elites bound together by fear now face an even greater fear, being dragged into a confrontation beyond anyone's control. And when fear changes its target, loyalty follows. Not because ideology collapses, but because survival instinct takes over. In that environment, an external attack, if it happens, might not be the decisive blow. It could simply be the final drop that spills a cup already full, accelerating a breakdown that began from within. As the quiet alliances tighten their grip from the outside, a second, far more dangerous siege is forming within Iran. One of doubt, division, and internal unraveling at the very core of power. And at that point, the greatest threat no longer takes the shape of bombs or missiles, but of a system slowly losing the very cohesion it needs to survive. At this point, Iran's greatest danger no longer lies in the skies or offshore. It lies deep within society and at the heart of a power structure once believed to be untouchable. Bombs, if they fall, can destroy bases, factories, infrastructure. But what threatens Iran now is something slower, quieter, and far harder to reverse: the unraveling of loyalty. When protests no longer resemble scattered calls for reform, but turn into a sweeping wave of anger, the first thing to break isn't a security barrier, it's trust. Trust that the system can still protect those who serve it. Trust that loyalty will be rewarded, or at least not punished when everything falls apart. Once that trust begins to crack, fear, once the strongest glue, starts to lose its hold. Within the machinery of power, signs of breakdown are never loud. They begin with hesitation. An order not carried out immediately, a report delayed, a hardline decision replaced by silence. Each act on its own might seem like a technical hiccup, but when they begin to appear all at once, they signal a system losing faith in itself. For the security forces, the most dangerous moment isn't when they face the crowd in the streets. It's when they begin to ask, if things spiral out of control, who will protect us and our families? The moment that question surfaces, the gun in their hand is no longer a symbol of power. It becomes a burden. Loyalty shifts from being a duty to becoming a survival gamble. Higher up, interest groups begin to envision diverging futures. Some choose to stay the course, hoping the system is strong enough to weather the storm. Others quietly prepare escape routes, moving assets, securing safe havens. Still others freeze, waiting to see which side gains the upper hand. This fragmentation paralyzes any collective response. Power doesn't collapse for lack of weapons. It collapses when it no longer shares a common direction. In that context, external military pressure, no matter how intense, merely acts as a catalyst. It exposes the fractures that were already there. An airstrike, if it happens, may spark a short-lived surge of defiance, but if the system is already corroded from within, that effect will fade quickly, leaving behind a starker question: are there still enough people willing to pay the price for the regime's survival? History shows that the fastest falling regimes are not those crushed completely from the outside, but those that lose the ability to defend themselves from within. When each individual in the apparatus starts to prioritize their own survival over the survival of the system, collapse becomes only a matter of time. And time, in moments like these, is always the cruelest enemy. Iran is not facing a simple crossroads between war and peace. The nation is facing something far more brutal, a test of whether its power structure still has enough cohesion to withstand pressure from both outside and within. Bombs may not fall today, but if the unraveling has begun, it will continue, day by day, hour by hour, in silence. And when a system begins to collapse from within, there is no bunker deep enough to shield it forever. Now that every piece has been placed on the board, the world is forced to confront a question no one to answer too soon. Is this merely a meticulously calculated act of deterrence, or the opening move of a new war quietly taking shape? History has seen moments like this before, where wars didn't begin with grand declarations, but with silence that lasted too long, with battle formations in position, but weapons unfired, with leaders acting as if there were no choices left to make. In Iran, the moment the supreme leader descended deep into a bunker went far beyond a standard security precaution. It became a symbol of something far more dangerous, a power that no longer has the confidence to stand in the light, but instead coils itself in the dark, fearing the outside world while distrusting its own foundation within. When power enters that state, every scenario becomes fragile. A bold decision might be made not out of strategy, but out of desperation. A minor misstep could spiral into a major crisis, simply because there's no calm hand left to pull back in time. For the world, this is a moment to watch more than speak, because what's unfolding isn't happening on diplomatic stages. It's in the slow, deliberate movements of militaries, in the subtle shifts within the psyche of power, and in the quiet cracks forming under the surface of a system under multi-layered stress. If war breaks out, it may come with many justifications, but the deepest cause is often this: a regime that no longer believes it can survive unless it bets everything. Iran's story, right now, isn't just the story of a single Middle Eastern nation. It's a stark reminder that the global order is far more fragile than we like to believe. When military pressure meets internal fracture, when fear replaces reason, the line between deterrence and war can vanish in an instant. The days ahead won't just determine Iran's fate, they'll pose a larger question for the entire region. Will the world stop at the brink of conflict, or cross the threshold into a new confrontation? And in that uncertainty, every observer has a voice. If you have your own perspective, if you believe you see what's coming next, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue tracking, analyzing, and unpacking the critical geopolitical shifts that are shaping the world we live in.